got very good arms.
He didn't fall? Inconceivable.
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and we've been covering all the changes and evolution that we're seeing in a very short period in the comic book industry. Of course, the biggest one being there's now competition for Diamond Comics distributors in the form of Lunar distribution and UCS distribution. But there's a lot of things that still need to be addressed or changed about the comic book industry to move forward to have a better functioning market industry for readers, for retailers, for publishers, for everyone. And I do have one friend of the family here on Thinking Critical that thinks that a lot of the issues that need to be addressed haven't even begun to be talked about at this point. And that man is Yul Carter from Fantastic Comics. How you doing, buddy?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me on.
I see in the live chats when you do Comics Aficionados, and you're always saying there's a lot of things that need to be addressed, and people aren't even talking about it. So here's your chance. What are some of the big issues that aren't even being discussed right now that you think should be on the top of the list?
So right off the top, I think the price of comic books are really out of hand. It's one thing, I guess, if it's an anniversary, 1,000th issue, whatever, and you're going to price it, oh my goodness, at $10. Those were always, more expensive issues. Well, actually, not even when they didn't care, it wasn't even a more expensive issue. The issue 50, issue 100, the annual maybe was a little bit more expensive, but not so outrageously as they are these days. And then comics themselves are like $4 on average. And then if it's a smaller company, they might be more expensive. I think comic books need to be
Marvel, if it's a #1 issue, it's going to be $5.
Yeah,
$5.99. 25, it's going to be $5 or $6.
Yeah, or it's a wedding issue right in the middle of 1 through 10. $8. It's an $8 book, exactly. Or I think the price of comics need to be $1 less. A $3.99 book is $2.99 again.
You know what's crazy? Back in the day when everyone waxes poetic about how kids were all into comic books, the average price of a comic was only twice as much as a candy bar. So if you went into your pharmacy and the candy bar was 15 cents, the average comic book was 30 cents. Now the average candy bar, I believe it's 75 cents to $1. So comic books should be between $1.50 and $2 technically, if you kind of go by those prices. If you want that impulse buy, and they priced themselves completely out of an impulse buy market and completely away from children and that new readership that they actually need.
If you go to the most extreme convenience store like a 7-Eleven, those might be $1.50. So even that, at the worst, that's a $3 comic book. And that's really what I'm asking for. Instead of $3.99, it's $2.99. If it's a $3.50 book, it's $2.50. And another thing, I've got a lot of underground comics. And I don't mean underground like Crumb. I mean like, independents. And those were always a little bit more expensive than, your normal comics, your mainstream comic books. Now, just to compete with Marvel and DC, they have to actually lower their price to $3.99, whereas that would have been the high price. But when you're like independent and you don't have Marvel and DC standards and you're charging the same amount, that hurts.
Pricing is a major issue, and it's an inhibitor to the market growing. I think as the prices go up, the market is inevitably going to shrink. They say that the margins go up, or maybe it's more profitable. Yes, but it's just like movies. Ticket sales are down as ticket prices go up.
All right, so I also have a problem with the way they distribute their comics or how often they come out. Marvel is, I guess, notorious now for doing the weekly comic every once in a while.
Contagion or Dawn of X. House of X Powers of 10.
Oh yeah, okay, that was a good one. All right, that was a good example. I think Hickman doing it, you give a lot more allowances. But when it's something like Avengers and it's just so they can reintroduce the Hulk, it's like a 10-week storyline or 16 weeks, whatever it was, and then they back it up with X-Men coming out before
just so they can get into Age of X-Men before the Dawn of X relaunch.
Exactly. Yeah. Then they end the series and then they do it again. It happens so often. And then DC, ever since Rebirth, has been doing bi-weekly comic books. I'm not a big fan of the Tom King run, but what I think would have helped it out a lot more is if it was a monthly comic book. And instead of having all those trade issues that really don't matter to the entirety of the story, you know, those pages where he just has like a long poem that he's writing to Selena and stuff like that, those might not actually be in the comic book, and Batman would be a little bit more tight. A lot of people like to, you know, binge these days, and that's a great way to do it. When you see that you've collected 4 months and you see all those comic books piling up, it really hinders your ability to go back and care about it. And going forward, it might hurt it also, you know, wanting to purchase it.
I think some titles should be like bi-monthly, come out 6 issues a year, give more time for better stories, better quality art, because that's another issue. Another thing with every 2 weeks is you have to have 2 regular artists on the team. Most titles can't have an Ethan Van Sciver and a Rafa Sandoval as your 2 artists on Hal Jordan Green Lantern. You know, that's an amazing team right there. But just think they could be doing 2 different books.
That is another aspect, which is exactly what you said. I would like to see a return to quarterly comic books, bi-monthly comic books. I think with you, I've said it before, that Daredevil originally, when Frank Miller came on, was a bi-monthly book, and he had to like earn his stripes and show that he could actually write a comic book, that it would sell.
X-Men was as well when Claremont came on.
Exactly. And then when they proved that the book was important to people enough to make it a monthly comic book, they did that. Look, if Batman comes out bi-weekly, what I'm doing is I'm exciting you on Batman, not the story that's going on. If it's a longer story, something that's going to take longer in time to actually come out, I have a chance to read it. Other people have a chance to read it and tell me what happens. There's time for people to absorb it and say, wow, I really did enjoy that. Or I finally got to it and I need to get the next issue. I'm not suggesting that Batman should be bi-monthly, but, you know, off titles like Nightwing definitely could be.
Yeah, and that would also address the huge issue of market saturation. There's too many books coming out every week.
Right. If you want 100 titles, that's fine, but let's make at least 25 of them or 50 of them bi-monthly or quarterly or in an anthology. You know, just dedicate it, you know, get Marvel Comics Presents for real up again. Same thing with DC. I like those DC Comics Presents or Brave and the Bold. You know, Deadman doesn't really ever deserve a series more than 3 to 6 issues, but he's a very cool character in the DC universe. Have him team up with somebody. Going back to the comic books coming out in a timely manner, there's time in between before they come out and then the trade comes out. If people realize that they missed an issue and the company isn't going back to print on them, they're just going to wait for the trade, and then it's a totally different type of market that's coming out. And I think that just putting out collections so that people get caught up in the series isn't really driving them to the monthly comic books that they should be wanting to get. Why are they producing monthly comic books if what they really ultimately want to do is just put the collections out in book form?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a whole different market. It's a whole different audience. But they are, I know a lot of people that are like, yeah, I'll just trade wait. It's not like there's a big gap anyway.
That's the thing. DC used to have a gap like that. If something was, all right, so think of it this way. 6 issues get collected in a hardcover for DC. This is how it usually would happen. They wouldn't come out with that hardcover until 6 months later. So it wasn't until the 12th issue of that comic book that the hardcover would come out. And then it wasn't until another 6 months later that the soft cover would come out of that collection. So it's not the 12th issue, it's the 18th issue you're waiting for to get the soft cover if you're that kind of person. So there was all that time in between for me to sell all those issues, you know, as back issues. And sometimes in a comic store, that's where you're really making your money.
Yeah, there's definitely an issue with oversaturation. I do think they need to spread out the release a lot of these comics and give retailers a break.
Speaking of break, the thing I always argue for is returnability in comic books. If these companies are going to keep coming out with their books and they're not going to they have to put up or shut up. If they're going to put something out there, they have to make it returnable. I'm done with this. If you want me to take a chance on your book, you have to do something for me. And a deep discount isn't doing it anymore, Marvel. And DC will often, when they want you to buy a comic book, they'll say the first 3 are returnable. And that's wonderful. What about 4, 5, and 6? You know, what about the next storyline? I'm trying to get people in this all the time. And I would like to have extra for the shelves so that I can sell your product for you. But you aren't making it returnable. And Diamond, I think it's Diamond, has had, no, maybe it was the different publishers actually. They've worked with Barnes and Noble and back in the day Borders and other bookstores, and they allow those to be made returnable. And I just don't understand when this conglomerate dies. The small store might still be around, and the small store has been doing it all this time. There's no loyalty from publisher to distributor to store, unless you're those big stores that, you know, are on the social media or multiple locations, or obviously someone that ships. Those are the stores that the publishers like. Diamond doesn't fight for your comic stores, not that I've seen.
To address what you said about returnability, like as a retailer, when something like House of X Powers of 10 comes out, those comic books are weekly. How many issues did you have to order before you got to sell the very first one?
Oh, I had to have placed the order for the 4th one before the first one came out, I bet.
So you had to order 4 comic books, sight unseen, no information about how your customers were going to react, no information really about the story or the quality, and you just had to do it on blind faith that Marvel was giving you a good product.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's, yeah, well, again, DC is nice, and they would, like Dark Metal, or whatever the hell it was called.
Dark Knight's Metal.
Yeah, Dark Knight's Metal. They made those returnable, and that was cool. But then you get all that side issue stories, and I ordered properly, so yay me. But I didn't order extra because they weren't made available or returnable. And
those were the best stories.
They were. They were really cool stories. When you have something that's big, so let's say you sell 50 of something. So let's say it's Amazing Spider-Man. This is what I was taught. You can't hope to sell 50 Peter Parker Spider-Man if it's coming out at the same time also. You can only help that, you're going to help probably like half of that, really. It's going to be your 25 selling book. And then if you have Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, you could probably cut that in half also. That's how I'm going to order for that kind of stuff. And if you don't believe in it and make it returnable, I'm not even going to buy that many probably. Or at least that's how a lot of stores are these days. I shouldn't say that's just me personally, but you've heard a lot about the selling back issues model of comic book stores. I think Diamond really just has to still start telling publishers that you have to make your stuff returnable. Now, is DC going to say, well, that's the final straw. We're only going to do DCBS in Midtown? I don't know. I mean, they seem willing to do whatever they want when they want. Marvel, for some reason, I've been bagging on them and saying there's no loyalty in the publishers, but they seem to be sticking with Diamond.
What's crazy is with Marvel, they don't offer returnability, but they will ship you more comics than you ask for on not on the good titles, just on the shitty ones.
I think there's been like 2 times where I've actually got comics that I was like, holy cow, I'm so happy we got this overship. And what it is it's if your number is 50, they're probably doubling it to 100. They don't let you know up front that this is going to be happening. I mean, probably a good move because, I'd only order 5 of something or, expecting 10. If they were going to do that, they should always do that one on like number 3 issues, number 4 issues. That would make sense. Nobody would be upset if they got a little extra of 3 and 4, especially if it's free, other than the shipping. But again, if you're a store that orders 50 of something and you're getting 100, that's when that box thing, the weight of the box actually makes a difference sometimes.
Yeah, I remember going into a comic shop. On the end displays, it was just Marvel Legacy with all the venticular covers. And I asked the clerk, I was like, why did you guys order so many Marvel Legacy comics? And they're like, we didn't order those.
Oh, wow.
Like, they sent us an extra like $250.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big store. They're like, but we can't give them away. Nobody wants them. They were discounted down to like $1. Still no one wanted to buy them.
It's crazy. I've had so many comics shipped to me because of the overship. And I think the one that was like the most offensive to me was Iceman. And it's not because of anything about Iceman other than the fact that, and this is another problem with comics, Marvel ended the Cena Grace Iceman series, and then they came back and did a 5-issue mini-series so that they could get a new #1, basically. They said, oh, it sold so well in libraries, we're going to give it another chance, when obviously this was the other 5 issues he had already written. It just flows so seamlessly with the first volume. That insults me. But what really insulted me was how hard I worked in trying to figure out how many people would actually come in my store and buy this comic book. And I said, all right. And usually I do it in 5s, 5, 10, 15. And I'm like, no, I think we can sell 17 of these comics. So I put that number in, and then they double shipped it. I don't want this many of this book. I already worked so hard, way harder than I should for an Iceman comic, but I just wanted to be right. And I sold about 12, just to let everybody know.
Perfect.
Well, having a little extra on the shelf is not a bad idea, but when you don't make it returnable, I could show you what 8 years of comics in this one location I've been in looks like. And it's a lot of comic books. If you made it returnable, that would make my job a whole lot easier. And I understand that the discount will not be the same, and when I go into a contract with Ingram, and when I go into contract with Abrams and Scholastic and First Second and all these other places I could get DC and Marvel comic books from, trades at least, they make those returnable if I opt into it that way. That is something that Marvel, DC, Diamond do not do, and everybody else does that. And DC, Marvel, Diamond are willing to do it when it's Barnes & Noble, but they're not willing to do it for us. And that's very upsetting.
It does feel like retailers, especially the small retailers, are the ones that really get dumped on the most, even more than fans.
There are people out there in the universe that are upset with store owners, saying that it's because of us that Marvel is, that they have the balls to do the things that they want to do. And that if we stood up to them,
collectors, if you didn't buy those stupid variants,
yeah,
they wouldn't be able to run all those scams on retailers.
Well, I mean,
Spider-Woman #1 is selling 140,000 comics. #2 is going to come in at about 75,000, and #3 is going to come in at 25,000. The real number should have sold from the beginning.
It's weird when you're like, oh my God, this book sold 100,000, and you really know it's a 30,000 selling book. And you got to wonder, how did they do that? They did that with overships. They did that with variant covers. They did all that stuff.
If you want this certain cover, you have to buy, 15% extra of this unassociated title.
I can't understand how there are stores that can actually comply. And like, oh, when you order 50 of this really crummy book, you get this one copy. You're able to buy this one copy. Who are these stores that are out there? And I'll tell you who those stores are out there. There's your Midtowns and your DCBSs. And your stores like Golden Apple probably can do that because they have
e-commerce sites, and the one dude that's in Alaska that actually wanted the comic book and ordered it from them and get it through in the mail, and they can get their money back.
Exactly. And I mean, that's fine. I mean, that's business. You got to do what you got to do, but that doesn't help. Again, the small stores. It makes us look kind of lame too sometimes. Yeah. What? You can't sell 50 She-Hulks?
All right, you. I don't know if we covered all of the issues that you thought needed to be addressed that haven't been addressed, in these very trying times. But we are up against the clock. I hate to cut it short, but I do really appreciate the time.
No, I appreciate it too. I know I can be a little scatterbrained, but hopefully you got something out of this.
Oh, we got a lot out of it. I think people are going to enjoy this video. You make a lot of really great points. Returnability, I think, is just...
That's my number one. That really is my number one. Returnability.